Hi everyone, this is Mark Metternich, and my website is markmetternich.com. If you're interested in my video tutorials, just check it out right there. I have over 13 and many more in the making. Sometimes I just wake up and I start looking at images and I'm thinking about some technique or something that's really, really important that a lot of photographers do not know about. It surprises me because in my workshops, we'll bring these up and people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. So here's just a short freebie about exposure and sharpening and noise issues and dynamic range. So let me knock down a myth. There is this general myth that the Sonys or the Nikons, they have such wide dynamic ranges, that's not a myth, that we really can get most of our shots just in one exposure. We really don't need to bracket anymore or bracket and blend anymore. Now the answer, as I've said in other video tutorials, is the answer is yes and no. The answer is yes if all you're going to do is make small, low-resolution web images for social media or your website. But if you ever want a pristine quality master file that later on can be turned into a fine art, exquisite print or enlargement, the answer is absolutely no. There is a massive qualitative difference between an image that is slightly overexposed and then brought down in exposure than one that is shot sufficient to get the dynamic range and look great for web, and you won't see any issues there because it's low resolution and it's very small, but it becomes a mess when you end up making any type of significant quality fine art print. If you're making a 4x6, no one's going to see it. But if you're going to make a 10x18, a 24-inch print, a 30-inch print, and 40, 50, 60, 70 up to feet, it makes a massive difference. So let me show you really quickly. I'm just going to fly through this and I'm going to miss so many things that I'd like to teach you, but they're going to be in all of my other video tutorials. Especially the ultimate sharpening workflow for fine art printing, the remake of that, which will be coming out probably in a couple of months. The first one is solid in its content. There's just a few things that need to be updated, but I'm so excited about it, I'm going to redo the whole video. If you're interested in that video, I would say purchase it now, study the material, and then just send me a message and say, hey, what's the updates? And I can tell you what the updates are. But here is something critical, okay? And here is an awesome example. I pulled up this image here. This is not Horseshoe Bend. This is another bend on the Colorado River. There's many of them. And this is one of the ones that I'm really proud to have been one of the very first people to ever photograph. And I lead people here during some of my workshops. But I'm down about maybe 500, 600, 700 feet looking across, looking up, as you can tell, on this massive mountainous gooseneck bend. Now I'm going to zoom up on this. These are the bracketed images of this shot. When we evaluate capture sharpening, it is now advocated to do it in Photoshop as a layer on a copy of your master file so that you never introduce the artifacting into your original master file. That's something, go to YouTube. I have a video out on that now. It's very, very clear. How you capture sharpen, what it actually does is all the same as I've been teaching for years, but it's just very advisable to not introduce any type of artifacting into your original master file. This is the one before you size it down for web or before you size it up. So turn that off in RAW, Lightroom RAW, Detail tab, or Camera RAW, or any other RAW converter you're using, and do it in a layer in Photoshop using Filter, Camera RAW Filter, Detail tab. And you can use the deconvolution sharpening there to undo the lens blur. That's a whole science. I'm not going there, going into exposure, but I want to give you a really graphic example. This is an image that I'm going to work on this morning. I pulled it up, and yes, easily I got this whole thing in one single shot. No problem. And all I have to do is turn up the color noise. It looks fantastic for web. But here's the difference for print. If I'm ever ever going to make a really good quality print, I'm really shooting myself in the foot by choosing that one exposure and not going with that overly bright exposure taken down. Why? It's very, very simple in one respect and a little bit complex in another, but I'll keep it simple. When you overshoot in brightness by just a single stop, maybe 1 to 2 stops, just a little bit bright, just a little bit brighter on your LCD that you feel comfortable with, and then you pull it up in the raw converter, and then you take it down in exposure to look correct, do you know that you're actually doubling the data in your shadows to middle tones? You're doubling the data. That means what? Color, fidelity, detail. Whoo-wee! How could that be? Because half of all of the data in digital files, the way it's captured before it turns into a raw photo, half of the detail is in the brightest 1 stop to 2 stops of light. That just brightest stop. So if you just take your image down by 1 stop, you're throwing away half, 50% of the quality of the pixels in your image. How could that be? Well, you'll have to study it to figure it out if you really want to know why, but let me just show it to you and prove it to you. Let's zoom up on this image. This is 100% viewing distance, which is the proper viewing distance for evaluating noise reduction and capture sharpening. But let me go up to 200% so that it makes it more vivid. I'll go to a certain area of this image. Now, the top image here that you're looking at, which looks really good. This was shot at f11. It could have been shot at 50 ISO expansion in my camera, but I didn't know how important that was at the time. I believe that it hindered dynamic range. For the most part, the newest cameras, the newest generation of cameras, it does not hinder dynamic range significantly or at all. The reason why people are thinking that it hinders dynamic range is because when you go to ISO expansion low, you have to actually go into your camera and turn it on so that you can go from 100 to 50, or otherwise you can't, like on the Sonys, you cannot go to 50. Nikon, it allows you to go from 64 down to 32. And in other cameras, it's different. What your camera's actually doing is it's, without you knowing it, it's shooting a image 1 stop brighter. Then it's taking it down in the camera without you knowing it, and then outputting it as a raw file. And if you really look at the noise reduction in those ISO expansion shots, it is significantly less. It's almost identical to what you're going to see here. But right here, this is the image that I shot substantially brighter, maybe a stop and a half brighter. And this one, the sky started blowing out just a little bit. But I wanted really good data, just in case I want to make a 96-inch print, a 60-inch print, a 50, a 30, a 24, with immaculate, exquisite detail. But watch this. As you can see, these are all the same image taken at all the same time. And this may not be the one that I actually work on because the sky ended up blowing up all the way across the sky. I was just doing some analyzing today, and I love to do analyzing. So what I did was I brought up the bracketed exposures. So what you're going to see is this first one here. And what it is the image without noise reduction. This image literally has 0 color noise reduction. Now I can see an argument of maybe putting in maybe 5 points or 10 points, but it has 0. The next image you're going to see is the one that is appropriate for the sky. And this is with the Sony, by the way. This has probably the second widest dynamic range of all the cameras out there. And it's almost identical to the newest Nikon D850. So incredible dynamic range. And you will see this exact same thing with Nikon D850 files or Nikon D810 files or Sony A7R III files. I work on other people's photos for print preparation constantly, for galleries or just for individual printmaking or whatever. I prep people's images for print. So they send me their files. And a lot of times I'll say, can I see the raw file as well? And then we'll find inherent workflow issues that we correct. and then I help prep it for a fine art masterful print. So anyway, I'm working on all kinds of files, medium format, film, everything you can imagine. I've been doing this for 16 years and 10 years full-time working on other people's photos, including filling up galleries worth of tens of thousands of humongous enlargements. So I'm always striving to get better at sharpening, at upsizing, at noise reduction, at studying and learning what is the very, very best that we can do. So here comes the massive difference. Here is the one that's exposed a little bit darker without noise reduction on. Holy smokes! Do you see that 50% less quality detail? I'm zoomed up at 200%, yes, but you can see it. I'll go back to 100 and you can absolutely see it. It's nasty. Now, you don't see this because there's a default amount of color noise reduction on in your raw converter, or you're even turning it up yourself. Now, here's the image without the color noise. So this is how you'd probably end up seeing it. And you'd be like, oh, that looks pretty good. And it does look pretty good. But what you're going to see here is it leaves a sort of a graininess. It's an artifacting. It's artificial. It's a discrepancy in the tonality of pixels that should have very smooth transition, but instead, like every single pixel next to each other are brighter, darker, etc. It's a graininess. And yes, when you pull way back, you don't see it. But here at 100% viewing distance, which is where we're supposed to be evaluating our sharpness and our noise reduction, and eventually in Photoshop doing our capture sharpening so that we can get 5 to 10% more quality detail out of that enlargement that otherwise is impossible to get no matter how you know how to sharpen. But let's look at this again. There's the noise, there's not the noise. There's the noise, there's not the noise. So basically what your raw converter is doing is it's blurring the noise. You could even do this in Photoshop. All you would have to do is go into color mode. And then all you would have to do is do a Gaussian blur. And there you go. You're blurring the color, but you're leaving the detail. But wherever a color speck disappears, you have a discrepancy in the pixels. Let's go up on the image. This is 12,800%. There is the color noise, and there it is reduced. It's blurring. It's blurring all of these pixels. But what you get is this grainy look. I'm going to go back to 200%, which is really seriously zooming in. I would never use 200% to evaluate this. I'm just doing this to teach. But watch this. Exposed brighter by about 1.5 stops. Clean. This is with no noise reduction. I'm not advocating for no noise reduction. I'm just showing you, look at the data difference. We'll pull back to 100% viewing distance. There's, with the noise reduction, look at that graininess. I mean, the whole thing changes. It almost looks like a different image. If you look over here in the shadow area of the river, grain, clean, grain, clean, just perfectly clean. There's not even any hint of graininess there. Now let's see the noise. This is before, and then there's what it looked like originally before the pixels were blurred. So do you see how incredible the quality of this image is? And it's only exposed brighter by about 1.5 stops. Incredible. And yes, for web, we could easily get away with this other one that looks like this because it's going to be so small you won't be able to see this. But if you ever make an enlargement, how are you going to sharpen this? How are you going to capture sharpness without this turning into a mess? Watch, I'll go ahead and I'll run some capture sharpening on it. Filter, camera raw filter. supposed to view it at 100% viewing distance, but I'm going to go to 200 just so you can see it on the video better. Pretty much this is super fine sandstone, except for the river and the sky. So you'd want a very tight left on the radius, right on the detail. This is deconvolution sharpening. There is an argument for bringing these slightly in depending on the type of detail that you're actually working on. But when you're working on fine detail, which we usually are in the detailed areas of landscape, like rocks in the foreground or sandstone or anything that has a lot of detail in it, this is most often the very best way to do the capture sharpening. And watch what happens when I turn this up. It's hideous. It can't even take any. Seriously, that looks artificial. It immediately just continues to look more and more and more artificial. It never actually looks better. 10 points, you may not see it, but it's grainier. 20 points, it's grainier. 30 points, it's looking just absolutely disgusting. So what does that mean? It means that in the shadows up through the middle tones, maybe even up into the lights or even the highlights, if you're not exposing optimally, even though for web it will look great because you've sized it down, it camouflages all of this. But for print, you are absolutely limiting the amount of sharpening that will be necessary in this image to draw out all of its detail. I can't capture sharpen this at all. I can't. And capture sharpening is a very special type of sharpening that basically is undoing about 5 to 10% of the inherent lens blur that's in your image. Light goes through glass, it gets blurred, it hits your sensor, and this algorithm is designed to some extent, undo that blur without artifacting. Then you size up your image to, 40 inches, 24 inches, 60 inches, and you should see no artifacting. But it will be a little soft because you've sized it up, and then you can throw custom sharpening on it for output. You can't do it. So now you have this artifacting, then you size it up. What happens? The artifacting gets worse. It gets bigger. It gets more obvious. Then you try to sharpen it. You can barely sharpen it. Now, let's do the opposite. Let's go to the clean file. Here's the clean file. Now again, I did not add any noise reduction to this. In fact, I'm going to go ahead right now and bring in the same one, but I'm going to actually use just a touch of noise reduction, so there's no weird color specks. I don't really see any, but I'm going to use just a tad. So now I'm pasting in the one I used 20 points of noise reduction for color. Command V. Oh yeah, it changes a little bit. Just a little bit. And again, we're at 200%. I do not advocate 200%. We should be at 100% viewing distance when evaluating this. But I can tell you there's not one speck of noise. Now, watch this. Filter, camera raw filter, 100% viewing distance, radius to the left, detail to the right. I would not add this to the water or the sky at all, none. Watch this, 10%, looks better. 20%, looks better. I see no artifacting. I'm going to put on my super glasses. These are the ones that I can pretty much put my nose to the screen, although that would be too close to evaluate this. So I'm going to get within about 6 inches. And I'm going to raise it up 10 more points. Ooh, looks exquisite, perfect, wonderful. I'm going to go to 40, and you know what? This could handle probably 40, but because I don't want to overdo, I'm going to go ahead and back it off to say 35. And that's just in this area. Things in the distance will be farther away. That graininess will show up a lot more. So I'd do it on a layer in Photoshop as a mask, and I'd sort of paint it into the areas at 100% viewing distance that enhanced the quality of the detail with no artifacting. And then areas that it's starting to become noticeable, like out of focus areas or the edges of the lens where it's more blurry, or the water or the sky, all of that would be masked out customly. But what I'm doing is I'm undoing blur, and I'm introducing 5 to 10% at least more quality to the detail. We're actually undoing blur. So it's like we shot this with a Zeiss lens instead of a Canon lens to begin with, before we size it up. It's incredible, if you do this right, how much better your prints can be. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to zoom up to 200%. It will look a little grainy and gritty at 200%. It's supposed to, but I just want you to see. See, it looks blurrier, more detailed, blurrier, more detailed, blurrier, more detailed. But at 100% viewing distance, you may not see this because of the compression in the video. Oh man, there's a big difference, and I see no artifacting at all. None. Let's compare that to the image below, and let's go ahead and run sharpening on it. Filter, camera raw filter. And 10, 20, 30, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hit OK. Look at the difference. That's going from bad to hideous. From bad to hideous. It's absolutely disgusting. There's no way I would ever want my print to look like that in comparison to that, let alone that. Okay, just to show you that the first image is not some fluky example, here is a photo I'm working on for a client for a gigantic enlargement, and it was shot with the newest Nikon, even at ISO 64, as you can see up here, with the 24-70. And if you'll look at the exposure settings, I like to have this forced down quite a bit, by about 1 or 2 stops, and still look this approximate brightness. Now this image was basically shot ideally where the LCD on the back of the camera looked perfect, rather than washed out and getting that extra stop or 2 of light. Now, I've zoomed up to 200% because on this video there's compression, and some of this you won't be able to see, but I can see this absolutely the exact same way at 100% viewing distance here in RAW. And as you can see, there is no sharpening on at all, and there's quite a bit of noise reduction. When I turn off the color noise, there are color specks everywhere. This is a blue sky right here. This bottom part, this is a blue sky. And we should see no discrepancy in the tonality of these pixels. And all of this discrepancy, brighter, darker, is noise. And yes, the color noise slider will eliminate it and blur it out, but you still have that discrepancy. A clean file will be absolutely perfect across here with a incredibly slow gradation that you shouldn't even really be able to see to the human eye. Perfect example right there, even shot at 64 ISO. So the summary of this lesson is still think in terms of overexposing or optimally exposing your images, even when you're shooting in a wide dynamic range. Consider the idea of shooting ISO expansion low. If you feel like you may be losing some dynamic range, and a lot of times it's because it's shooting brighter, and so it's blowing out a little bit without you knowing it. But what I do for insurance purposes is I just simply bracket like crazy in the field. I'm usually shooting 5 shots at a time, 9 shots at a time, at least 3 shots at a time, and then I can pull them up later and find out which ones have the best detail. There was a shot here from this exact same scene that I'm actually going to work on, and it was a series where the whole sky just went completely red all the way across, that I went really long on the exposure for the land. Of course, the sky blew out completely, and I would just use the next exposure that was darker for the sky and blend those together easily. But when I looked at it, it actually was softer than this one here. So I had gone from like 2 seconds up to like 5 seconds and 10 seconds. The 5 and the 10 seconds were blurrier. Do you know what the reason is? Why? Because there was a little bit of wind. So you have to take that into consideration as well. If it's a little bit windy and your camera might be shaking, a longer exposure might end up being a blurrier exposure. So you have to be aware of the conditions you're shooting in. Is your tripod stable? Are you using a cable release so that you're not touching your camera? Things like that. Are you shooting at your sharpest f-stop overall for your lens? Things like that. I hope that helps you. Hope it encourages you to bracket wider for more exposures, get more exposures, and evaluate them more closely. And again, don't do the capture sharpening in RAW. Do that in Photoshop on a copy of your master file. Do no sharpening on your master file at all. That's your done file before sizing down for web or before sizing up for print. And then what you want to do is capture sharpen at 100% viewing distance with extreme care and with almost perfection, because if you don't do it right, you'll introduce artifacting into the image that when you size it up will hinder the output custom sharpening that you will apply to it to make it a optimally detailed enlargement. Check out my website. Most of our workshops are booked up now, but the ultimate fine art printmaking workshop with master print guru Robert Park and myself in Las Vegas, Nevada have just a few spots left on it. If you're serious about printmaking, it will save you thousands and thousands of dollars of inferior prints and years of trial and error. And there's nothing that we don't teach, from raw capture in the camera all the way to the master print and every single link of the chain, and how to absolutely optimize it for maximum quality prints. This is a cutting edge workshop. I believe there's nothing like it on the market. Next year, the price is going to go up substantially. Every single person who did this workshop was blown away by what they received, and they get it all on MP4 for as much review as they want. Basically, they have everything that they need to learn to totally create masterpieces, or at least significantly improve their printmaking skills, and they never have to take another class again. I have a couple openings at this moment on my September Chasing Monsoon Light in the Great Southwest workshop, where I take people to incredible places like this. My Oregon workshops are all booked up except for fall. We have a few more openings on our fall workshop. Glacier booked up in about 2 to 3 weeks without me even officially announcing it. So next year we're going to probably do 2 or 3 of those. Anyways, all the best to you and yours, sincerely, and great light to you. Enjoy that adventure out there.